after all these years I had been doing these interventions, it finally hit me that almost all of the interventions that work to make us happier, the reason they work is they make us feel more connected to and loved by others.
You can have all these different kinds of love. The central element is the idea of realizing that somebody is expressing care and concern and warmth for you, that it's experienced as genuine, that it's experienced as understanding something about you that is real and authentic to yourself, and really taking that in and really experiencing that as a transaction that's going on between you and the other person.
That was Sonja Lyubomirsky and Harry Reis on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey listeners, just a super quick reminder that you can listen to the podcast ad-free by supporting us on Patreon for just $5 a month. Or you can support the podcast with a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you to everyone who's already supporting us. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode for our co-host discussion of today's interview.
I'm beyond excited to have Sonja Lyubomirsky and Harry Reis here to discuss their new book, How to Feel Loved, The 5 Mindsets That Get You More of What Matters Most. Sonja, you are a past guest of Psychologists Off the Clock from episode 227. I'm sure you do a lot of these.
Are you sure it wasn't 228?
You're like, I have it indexed. She is a distinguished professor at UC Riverside and author of 2 books that occupy prime real estate on my bookshelf, The How of Happiness and The Myths of Happiness. Harry Reis is an award-winning Dean's Professor at the University of Rochester and the architect of some of the most powerful relationship science I know. Together, they've written a book that answers a question most of us didn't even know we were asking incorrectly. How do I get more love? How do I feel more loved inside of my relationships? So I wanted to start by actually having you guys tell the origin story of this book because it reflects something critical in how research is often very siloed, but also how loving relationships can form in often unexpected places.
Harry and I were talking one day about sort of the secret to happiness, which is a question that I get asked a lot as a happiness scientist. And, we don't really know what the secret to happiness is, but I think it was Harry who said something like, I don't really know what the secret is, but I know that happy people feel loved. And he's, of course, the architect of, maybe my favorite theory in psychology, which is called partner responsiveness theory. Harry, maybe you could say more. I feel like I don't want to describe your theory.
Yeah, I'll be glad to describe it. And I just want to agree with what you said, Yael, about being siloed. We get siloed in these little research bins and we get more and more embedded in those bins. And what happened is that I've been doing all this research on responsiveness for many years, which is basically just the idea that what makes intimate connections work is that when one person opens up, that the other one is encouraging and validating and understanding, and that's what makes it work. So it's very much of a dance between 2 people. And so I've done all this work on relationships, and I knew the happiness work, and I, of course, knew Sonja's book and also her wonderful research, but, I'd never done anything on happiness. And, we were talking, and Sonja talked about how there are all these studies of what make people happy, and relationships are always at the top of the list, yet no one had ever really made the connection.
Yeah, mostly what I do in my research is I do happiness interventions, which are basically like clinical trials, but instead of testing, a new vaccine, we're testing happiness practices like gratitude or doing kindness. And after all these years, like really like 23 years, I think I had been doing these interventions, it finally hit me that almost all of the interventions that work to make us happier, the reason they work is they make us feel more connected to and loved by others, right? So when I write a gratitude letter to my mom or my best friend or to Harry, it makes me feel more loved by them. When I do an act of kindness for someone, it makes me feel closer to them. And so that's true for almost all of them, maybe not all of them. Maybe when you're engaging in physical exercise sometimes, or when you're meditating, it really could be just about you and nothing else. But almost all of them are about feeling connected and feeling loved. And we define love in a really very broad sense, right? So it's not just romantic love. You could feel loved by your neighbor. I remember my neighbor, we had a family of 6 during COVID, and we ran out of toilet paper because everyone else was hoarding it. And my neighbors brought a whole bunch of toilet paper for us, left it on our doorstep because they didn't want to actually knock on the door and see us because it was COVID. Anyway, I felt loved by my neighbors, even though I don't really even know them that well.
Yeah. I love that this book is not just about romantic love, but about love more generally. And I wonder if, maybe I'll throw this one to you, Harry, if you can define what are the ingredients of feeling loved?
Well, there are, of course, different kinds of feeling loved. You can feel loved in a romantic sense. You can feel loved in a friendship sense. You can feel loved by strangers when a stranger does something really kind for you, in the example that Sonja just gave. So you can have all these different kinds of love. The central element that's common to all of those is the idea of realizing that somebody is expressing care and concern and warmth for you. That another person is doing that it's experienced as genuine, that it's experienced as understanding something about you that is real and authentic to yourself, and really taking that in and really experiencing that as a transaction that's going on between you and the other person.
I love that definition. And it gets me to this question that I think is really at the core of your book and is really embedded in the title. It's kind of a surprising title, How to Feel More Loved. Because sometimes we are loved even when we don't feel that way. I had this interesting conversation with my middle son who's 12. And I asked him, when are the times that you feel loved versus when you don't feel loved by me? And he said, when I'm really stressed out or feeling really tired, I don't feel very loved. And it's not because I love him less. It's because, and he actually was able to articulate this, his mind is distracted or just not receptive and not feeling, open to feeling the love that I might send his way. And so you guys talk about a survey that you did in the book where you saw that 2/3 of people want to feel more loved than they do. And the problem sometimes isn't the lack of love, as I think is true for my son. So what is the problem? Can we be loved and still not feel loved?
I guess I'll start with that because that's a really major question driving the book. And by the way, I think that number, the more, Harry, we haven't really talked about this, but that 2/3, I actually think that's an understatement. Because when I talk, almost everyone will mention at least one relationship in which they want to feel more loved in. So kind of interesting. But at least 2/3 will acknowledge it. One of the major drivers of our ideas, which is that you can't really feel loved if you're not known. And the idea is that if you don't really lower your walls and sort of show more of yourself to others, you'll always wonder, and so they don't really know you. You always wonder that, if they really knew me, they wouldn't love me, right? And so some of the key to this question is that if we're not really opening up ourselves just to others, and actually, a teenage child is a great example of this because they often don't really tell us everything that's sort of in their inner minds. And so we really can't know them. And then they feel like they don't feel like they aren't really truly understood. Another romancer has to do with a metaphor we use for anxiously and avoidantly attached people, right? So it's the idea that it's you have this sort of cup of love, and your partner, your child, your friend, colleague, they show you love. They sort of express love. They're kind of pouring love into the cup of love. If you're anxiously attached, it's as though you have a leak in the bottom of the cup, and it's leaking out, and so you don't really fully feel loved. And if you're avoidantly attached, it's almost as though you have a lid. Actually, I have this lid on my cup right now, and there's just a small opening there, so the love isn't sort of getting in. And so that's another way to think about that.
Yeah, I think Sonja makes a number of good points. There's there's multiple reasons why people may not feel loved in a particular moment. The example you gave of your son is an example when people are really stressed out and totally focused in on themselves, they may not be capable of taking part in the transaction because it's a transactional kind of thing. So, to feel it, you need to really be paying attention to the other person. They may be listening to you and they may be curious about what's going on for you. But if you're not receptive to that, then the interaction is never going to happen. So, when you're so preoccupied that you can't connect with another person, it's not going to work. We make the point that, in the book, we call this the relationship seesaw. The idea that you lift the other person up and that encourages them to feel loved, which leads them to want to reciprocate and lift you up. So it's very much of a takes two to tango kind of idea of lifting and being lifted. And if you're too stressed or too preoccupied with what's going on for yourself, you may not be able to take part in that process. And so the connection is never going to happen, even if you're trying to communicate to your son that he is loved.
Harry and I actually were talking on the phone last night about marriages and sort of why sometimes marriages develop problems. And this is sort of another very similar example where it might start with you have little kids and you're sort of stressed out and you have work. And so you're not really connecting very much. And maybe for a while that's okay, but then you're not engaging in the seesaw, right? You're not really sharing and listening. And then after a while of lack of sharing and listening, you suddenly realize wow, I don't really feel loved by my spouse. They're not really showing curiosity in me. And really the reason they're not is because they're so damn tired and stressed out. They don't sort of have the capacity for it.
If you're a therapist like me, listen up. If you're in private practice or a group practice or thinking of starting one up, you should know about Simple Practice. Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, HITRUST certified, and built specifically for therapists. I've been in private practice for about 7 years, and Simple Practice has been a lifesaver for me. It helps me streamline everything. I send each new client a link, and then Simple Practice is my portal for consent forms, billing, appointment reminders, even my telehealth video platform. It frees up admin time so I can focus on the important part, seeing my clients. And I'm not the only POTC co-host who uses it. Emily does too, and Jill uses it to manage her group practice. And if you're just starting out or growing your practice, there's also a credentialing service that takes the headache out of insurance enrollment, which will save you so much time and effort. Simple Practice is trusted by over 250,000 health and wellness professionals, and you can feel that in how thoughtfully it's built for our work. If you're ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is the perfect time to try Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
I don't know about you, but I like keeping my money where I can see it. Unfortunately, traditional big wireless carriers also seem to like keeping people's money. So if you're fed up with overpaying for wireless with bogus fees and so-called free perks that actually cost more in the long run, it's time to switch to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at just $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest high-quality 5G network. So if you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/POTC. That's mintmobile.com/POTC. And remember, when you support our sponsors, you support the podcast. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
And I love this metaphor of the relationship seesaw. Now I think about it all the time. And one thing I'll just query you guys about is what I see often as a couples therapist is that both people feel like they're doing a lot of relationship work and that the other person is not doing as much. And it's this sort of mathematical impossibility that comes up in so many relationships. So what's the psychological trick that's happening in our brains where everybody sometimes thinks that they're doing more work, putting in more effort, accepting and tolerating more, difficulty than the other person? And because I think that interferes sometimes with the seesaw work. And to your point, Sonja, I think that often does happen when we're stressed out.
Well, that's not just true of distressed couples. That turns out to be true of almost any dyad. If you ask people what percentage are you contributing, it almost always adds up to more than 100%. One of the reasons for that is just the very simple idea that you know what you're doing, but you can't get into the head of the other person. You don't know exactly what the other person's doing. So we know what we're doing. We don't necessarily know what the other person's doing. Now, in a marriage that's deteriorating, add on to the fact that people are feeling like their needs aren't being met. People are feeling like they're not being loved. And so the resentment builds up. And one of the ways it comes out is in exactly the idea that you mentioned. There's a wonderful study that came out not too long ago that looked at, imbalance in household labor. And most people feel like they're contributing more than 50%. But one of the interesting things that came out of this study was that if you feel appreciated by the other person, that imbalance doesn't bother you. You're more willing to tolerate that you are putting in more if you feel truly appreciated by the other person, which, we would, say is very much akin to feeling loved.
It's such a great finding. And also, of course, leads us back to the importance of feeling seen and heard and understood. So that's really what's happening, right? Like, that person sees that you're doing more of the labor on behalf of the children. And so what we talk about in our book, the importance of like really listening and showing curiosity in the other person, it's like you're watching them. Like we want to be, like seen and heard. It's one of those studies. I love it because in some ways it's so easy, right? It's so easy to just like express appreciation for your partner. And yet many people don't do it.
I'm going to segue into a specific question about one piece of what you're talking about, which is this feeling that we have of wanting to be seen and understood. And you guys write in your book that one of the most common themes in human psychology is this desire to be understood, and that being seen deeply is a precondition to feeling appreciated and loved. So I'm curious, why is feeling understood so foundational to feeling loved?
It's a great question about where it comes from. I believe that one of the reasons why feeling understood is so important goes back to the idea of the need to belong. The need to belong is something that's deeply embedded in our neural architecture by evolution and all that. There's lots of work that comes out of that. And the question is, what does belonging really mean? Well, one of the things that belonging means is that you're accepted by your group, you're accepted by people who are important to you. And in order to feel really accepted and safe, you have to feel like they get you. So if I'm presenting a curated self and you tell me, wow, that's really great. I want to hang out with you. I want to be your friend. I'm going to be worried because the curated self is not the exact me. And so what are you going to do when you find out that I'm not really that interesting or, that beautiful, or my status isn't that high? How are you going to react? And I can't feel confident in your acceptance. So the idea of, the idea of feeling understood also fits with, the sort of higher cognition that we humans have, So, having a sense of self is important, and we want those selves to be connected to other people.
You hear this a lot. I mean, I get teenagers saying, my parents really don't understand me. Or friends will say to me, I know my wife loves me, but she doesn't understand me. It's very hard to feel truly loved when you're not really known, when people don't really understand you, because you always wonder, if they knew me, they might not love me so much.
And, you see this in popular culture all the time, too. About 20 years ago, there was a commercial for an investment firm, I believe, and their whole catchphrase was, "We understand." There are so many songs that talk about, "Do you see me?" People want to feel seen. They want to feel heard. It's all part of this same process.
And, we talk about in the book also about the importance of asking questions. And again, this is one of my favorite findings coming from Nick Epley at University of Chicago, that people think that if we ask each other kind of deep, kind of personal questions, that will be perceived as sort of probing and intrusive, like getting too personal. But that's actually not true. We crave being asked those questions. Like, we want to be seen. It's just very rare when we're asked those kind of deep questions. We want to be seen. We want people to know about our inner lives.
Yeah. And you guys referenced this Modern Love column that went viral, the How to Fall in Love with Anyone, that later became a book by the same writer. And it's based on intimacy building research. And they found that asking these progressively intimate questions really did lead to stronger connections between people. And it's so funny because we worry about being overly intrusive and hold back. But you also talk about the sharing mindset of the importance of being willing to kind of share parts of yourself that we might think are not that interesting for other people. So I want to talk a little bit about mindsets, which is like really at the core of your book. And I think this is such an interesting approach that you guys take. I love it because most relationship advice is really behavioral. Do this, say that. But your book is organized around these 5 mindsets, which is changing how we think about love as being a pathway to feeling more loved. And I wonder if you can explain why this approach. Why is it so important to change how we think about and approach it rather than to focus on specific behaviors?
Well, you're a marital therapist, so that several years ago there was this idea that if a couple is distressed, you have them sign a contract. I'll do these things if you do those things, and that approach failed dismally. And the reason it failed dismally is that you would do something on the list and they would say, oh, you're just trying to get me by doing the thing that's on the list. And of course, what makes a marriage work is if you do something and the other person feels you're doing that to be nice to me. Thank you. So the idea of a mindset is that yes, behavior matters, but it's more the underlying motive that the behavior expresses. And so it's the approach that you take to the connections and interactions that you're having. That stuff bleeds through. You can tell when a car salesman is being nice to you and all they're trying to do is sell you a car and they don't really care about you one bit. It's the mindset is the approach that you take to get into the interaction. And one of the important implications of that is that it's not a formula. Say the following 7 words and everything will work out. It's going to be a spontaneous thing that's going to evolve in the context of the conversation. So if you have a sharing mindset, if you have a listening to learn mindset, if you have an open-hearted mindset, you're more likely to say the things that will make it happen.
I think it's more powerful to talk about sort of inhabiting or embracing mindsets as opposed to doing particular behaviors because they could involve 100 behaviors, right? Because as Harry said, because they involve different behaviors in different situations, right? Set and setting really matters. And in some ways, maybe it's even like kind of simpler. Like if I say to someone, during your next conversation, think of yourself as a listener, not a speaker, right? I mean, that's in some ways, it's a very simple guidance to follow as opposed to like, do these 10 steps, first step 1, step 2, and then things fall out from there. And also people also are able to then kind of customize those behaviors to their personality and their resources and their strengths and weaknesses.
Well, back to the 36 questions that you started with, that is the most downloaded column in the history of modern love. And, one of the things about it, are those the questions? Are they the only questions? No, of course not. But the idea of the questions is that they're graduated. So you move from a relatively easy level of intimacy to a much deeper level of intimacy. And it's designed to promote conversations where people do exactly what you're talking about. They open up and they listen to each other and they respond positively to each other and they start to build a connection. We could come up with an entirely different 36 questions that would do the same thing.
When I give talks, one of my last slides is, I think, like 6 questions that people can ask each other that are some of my favorites. They actually don't come from the 36 questions. They come from my favorite card deck. There are all these decks of conversation cards you can purchase or download. This one is actually called The And I don't make money from this. It's just my favorite card deck. And so I picked my 6 favorite ones. And it's by far the most popular slide that I ever show. And people are always asking me, can you send that? Can you go back to that slide? They're all taking photos of it. But there's something magic about those questions. I think some people who are shy or and others might not have a lot of conversational skills or conversational experience. Like, I think it's a really nice, nice technique to have in the bag when you're sort of at a loss of what to say next.
Of course, there's always the fallback of tell me more.
That's in every therapist's toolkit, front and center.
It's okay. And we're not therapists, but yeah, I think there was an article that said it was kind of like the top 10 things that people want to hear. And maybe the most popular one was, tell me more. But again, said in a completely genuine,
right.
Like, I really, and again, this getting back to curiosity, like, when was the last time someone like was so curious about you telling your story and their eyes were bright and they're just like leaning in and they're like, tell me more. And you could argue, right, that we pay therapists, right, to show curiosity in us.
Picture this. You scroll through social media and there it is, an ad for the action figure that your life has been missing all along. And the shopping odyssey starts. What's your login? What's your password? Wait, you forgot both? Just take my money. But sometimes, instead of that chaos, I see a purple button at the top of the payment options, and that button makes everything easier. I can just complete my checkout with a tap of one button. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Heinz to brands just getting started. You can get started right away with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand style. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. See less carts go abandoned and more sales go with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/POTC. Go to shopify.com/POTC. That's shopify.com/POTC.
Here at Psychologists Off the Clock, we know that regular workouts are good for mental health. What the research conspicuously fails to address, however, is the outfit question. As in, does the psychological benefit hold if you're wearing sad, stretched-out leggings from 2016? Since the literature is silent on this, let's fill in the gap. Cute workout gear matters, which is where Fabletics comes in. Fabletics pieces feel like the kind of activewear you'd see with other high brands, but for a fraction of the price. What might be especially cool for many of our listeners is that the membership also gives you access to Fabletics scrubs. They just launched a collaboration with Nurse John, and if you work in healthcare or know somebody who does, new VIPs can get a full scrub set for just $15. The scrubs are made with durable, water-repellent fabrics, so spills just roll right off and feel far more breathable and flexible than premium scrubs without the premium price tag. Same activewear quality, just built for long days on your feet. Fabletics is one of the brands that once you try it, you get it. The value, the styles, the flexibility, that's the appeal of Fabletics. Fabletics already has incredible deals, and I've got an exclusive offer just for Psychologists Off the Clock listeners. Get 80% off everything when you sign up as a VIP. Just head to fabletics.com/POTC, take a quick style quiz, and be sure to select POTC when prompted to unlock your 80% off. That's fabletics.com/POTC.
I mean, one of the things that I think is really powerful about mindsets versus specific behavioral prescriptions is that different people are different. Like, one of the things that I know to be true is that I have to tailor my recommendations as a couples therapist for the partner who is highly introverted or on the spectrum or really anxious or slightly depressed or has a childhood background of whatever the thing is. Because, saying X, Y, or Z may not feel comfortable and therefore isn't going to feel genuine if they try, and therefore isn't going to be received as a genuine show of care by their partner. And so those mindsets kind of give you like this underlying rubric of, it's curiosity, it's the caringness, it's the willingness to share yourself that matter. And you can locate the approach that is best suited for you.
Yeah, exactly. The beauty of the mindset idea is that you can carry it out in, myriad ways as long as you have a genuine appreciation for what's transpiring between you and the other person.
We actually have a chapter where we talk a little bit about like, what if you're dating someone who's on the spectrum or from a different culture? People really have very different ways of showing listening, or showing curiosity or even sharing. Some people, they don't share very much or you have to really pay attention to cues, that you're not used to paying attention to. So that's where, like, again, getting back to sort of emotional intelligence, I think emotional intelligence classes would be actually much more useful than a lot of other things that we teach our students, because that's kind of at the root of so many things. Like, it's like the wisdom to know when to do X versus Y, right?
Absolutely. There's a New Yorker writer, Louis Menand, who wrote a column about a year ago that really struck me, where he was writing about what would be the most useful course for students to take in college. And his answer was a social psychology course, because it teaches you not only about emotional intelligence, but also about the kind of biases and teamwork and working with other people. And that's relevant literally to everybody.
I mean, it's so important. I think it's really the combination is like knowing, like, what does the science say about which ways of showing up in relationships matter is so important, because there's so much pop psychology out there that is not science-backed that can really be misguiding. One finding that is also really a thread throughout your book that I think is a really important one. You basically start with it and you certainly end with it. And I want to spend some time on this idea of reciprocity. You end the book with this invitation. It often begins with one person showing up differently, and that person can be you. And so I think that this is a really hard thing for most people to kind of digest, that sometimes we're going to have to go first, and sometimes we're going to have to feel like we go first for a while. And my question is, how does going first with mindsets help us to feel braver and more courageous to do that kind of work of showing up in relationships with people?
That's such an important point. Reciprocity may be the strongest rule of social behavior that exists. And it's not just in humans. You see it in many other mammalian species, certainly in the primates. Going first is risky. A lot of times people are not willing to go first. And I've seen a lot of distressed couples where, they'll say, you go first and then I'll do it. Going first almost always involves taking a risk, at least in some situations, a small risk, and others a rather larger risk. And to be honest, sometimes it doesn't work out. And if it doesn't work out, well, what's the famous quote from Wayne Gretzky? You don't score 100% of the times you don't take a shot. And the same thing is true in our relationships. If you don't make an effort to try to connect, you won't connect. Now, more often than not, the other person will respond. There's a lot of research showing that people think the other won't respond, and then they lead people to try it and do it. And it turns out that the other person does respond, and they have a lovely conversation. But you have to be the one to take the risk. I think it's fine to acknowledge it as a risk. No one's asking you to, open yourself up and make yourself completely vulnerable. You can do it in a sort of gradual way. And that is one of the ways you get things started.
Yeah. And I want just to add to that, I talked to a journalist yesterday, and she was really intrigued with this idea that most people, when they don't feel loved, they think, well, I just need to feel more loved. I need to make myself sort of more lovable, right? I need to make myself maybe more interesting and more attractive, and someone that other people will love me more. But actually what we say is quite different, which is for me to feel more loved, I should start with making the other person feel more loved. And it seems so obvious when you say it, and yet it's actually like a big leap. So you actually don't focus on yourself, you focus on the other person. And you really start with, not with sharing, but we actually usually start with listening and curiosity in the other person. And so, which is maybe a little bit less of a risk than sharing, but the risk is that you might be rejected. Like, it may not work, and sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes that person is not going to respond, and then you may not ultimately feel more loved by that person. And sometimes we accept that and we walk away.
Yeah, it's actually helpful to recognize it is a risk, but it's often the case, and this kind of goes back to Nick Epley's research, that we have miscalibrated expectations about how high the risk is. And actually, as to Harry's point about the Wayne Gretzky quote, the risk is much higher that we won't connect if we don't reach out first. But one thing I wanted to kind of add to this complicated thing, right, because connecting is a complicated dance, is that sometimes when we reach out first to show love towards others, our perception is that we've been so loving, and why aren't they receiving it and reciprocating in kind? And we assess that as a failure. And I think often what happens is that the way that we've conveyed love, for whatever reason, and there's so many reasons, didn't get received by the other person as we intended. It got misunderstood. And so the reason that there isn't reciprocation isn't because they don't want to reciprocate our love. It's because they didn't receive it in the way we intended it. And I'm just curious what you guys think about that.
Well, that's a a common problem in couples therapy. As you know, there is this technique called the speaker-listener technique. A bit cumbersome to use, but the basic idea is I communicate something, you listen to it, and you can't interrupt. And then you tell me what you heard. And then I clarify, no, what I meant was, and you can go back and forth until there's a consensus about what the message actually was. We perceive messages all the time, and certainly not just in marriages, in work, that's a very common kind of problem.
And I kind of don't want to invoke the love languages idea.
I love your academic takedown of it, but I mean, not that it doesn't have utility, but that the research on it is a little bit shaky.
It's more nuanced, right? But it's still a nice heuristic, right? And actually, I talk about love languages quite often, but this happened to me in a relationship where I didn't feel loved, but it turned out that the person was showing love with a gift, which is not my love language. But not in some other ways that is my love languages. And so, so there's something to that where you just like don't see like they are showing love. And then you just like don't read it as showing love.
And to your point about the listening to learn and also just like a radical curiosity mindset is to have that as a discussion. Like, I'm trying to show you love. Are you feeling loved, or what would make you feel loved? Because I want to show you love. I want you to feel loved by me. Even that can almost like reduce the risk because you're not actually putting yourself out there. You're more just kind of having a shared conversation about what kinds of things make you feel loved.
What a great question. What can I do to make you feel loved? Again, just another anecdote. I love the show Couples Therapy, where they have real couples in New York. And one thing I love about it is that to me, it's almost like it's just so obvious where they'll be fighting. And really at the heart of it is no matter what he's doing, she's not feeling loved by him. No matter what she's doing, he's not feeling loved by her.
One of the things that's wrong with the concept of love language is that it doesn't parse out quite as neatly as they say. There's many other kinds of love languages than the 5 that he's come up with. More importantly, everybody wants the affirmations and the statements of love and quality time. And that works for everybody, regardless of what you say your number one love language is. It's really more a question of communicating what are your needs, what do you want, and then, tailoring behavior or having a mindset to match those needs and wishes.
I love the water bottle metaphor of anxious attachment versus avoidant attachment that Sonja described earlier, because I do think that if we are sort of insecurely attached and somebody shows us love, to mindfully recognize it may not feel as loving as I want it to feel, but not because my partner isn't being loving, but because I have a leak.
Yeah. Well, there's interesting work on that that's just been coming out now. For years, people thought of attachment styles as sort of, once you get past the age of 5, forget it, you're stuck. And there's interesting research now that shows what you as a partner can do if you have a partner who is anxious or avoidant. So if you have a partner for whom, the water keeps going through the cup, what you have to do is be continually reinforcing, continually reassuring. So in essence, you're starting to block the bottom of the cup so that it can fill up. And the same thing is true for avoidance. If someone's avoidant and they can't let the water in, what you have to do is make them feel safe, not threaten their autonomy, keep the drama to a minimum so that they'll open the cup a little bit and allow it in. Now, sometimes it's hard for partners to do those things, but if you want to make a relationship work with someone who's got a very strong insecure attachment style, that's what's going to work.
Yeah, I love knowing that attachment styles aren't fixed. There's something that can be malleable in healthy relationships, that healthy relationships where we learn and grow together can be healing for that. And it actually brings me to my next question, because of the 5 mindsets, the one I love most is the multiplicity mindset. Because I do think that we have a tendency, whether we're talking about love languages or attachment style, to sort of be reductive in how we see ourselves and other people. So I wonder if you can share what multiplicity means in this context and why it's essential to feeling loved.
Well, the part of me doesn't want to give everything away in our book, but maybe what I'll focus on is using the multiplicity mindset on yourself. And so this idea that human beings are really complex and we're messy, and it's like we're a quilt of both good and bad qualities, right? So I'm generous at times, but sometimes I'm a little narcissistic and sometimes I'm a little selfish and sometimes I'm loyal and sometimes I'm not. And to recognize that in others and in ourselves. And it's really, really hard actually. And so we have a section in the book about the importance of self-compassion and kind of like seeing yourself like a kind friend might, when you do fail or you mess up or when you do something not so great, you show a trait that's sort of not so positive. So I think that is really important. And there's this sort of cliche that you need to love yourself before you can love others, or you need to love yourself before you can feel loved. I actually think that's wrong. I think it's kind of like a two-way street. It's much more complicated than that. So I actually don't believe that you can't ever feel loved if you don't sort of truly have self-love or self-compassion for yourself. But it's certainly a really important. It certainly helps to feel loved, to have love for yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sonja. And I'll take it from the interpersonal perspective. We're all flawed. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. Sometimes we do incredibly stupid things. Sometimes we do great things. If you're going to judge the person totally on the basis of the worst thing they did, you're never going to really make a good connection. One of the things that can make these connections work so well is if you can show that you understand that sometimes people do bad things. Sometimes people do stupid things. One of the most interesting examples of this is how couples respond to finding out that their partners had an affair. The interesting thing about this is that very often that leads to improvement in the relationship, not to divorce. There aren't really good statistics on this. I spent several days trying to find some really good statistics on this, and they don't exist. But we know that often relationships can improve after that. And one of the steps in that's important is the partner who had the affair acknowledging, hey, I did something stupid. I'm sorry, taking responsibility for it, but then being forgiven by the other. And when those things happen, then the couple can begin to move forward. It involves recognizing that we are not every behavior we do. Parents know this in child rearing. Your kid screws up. You criticize the behavior and not the child. And the same thing applies to our friendships and our work relationships too.
The infidelity example makes me think back to what we were just talking about, sort of that married couple that is like, they're stressed out, they're so busy, they're exhausted, they really are not opening up or truly listening to one another. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the time. And then something like an infidelity or some event happens that gets them to sort of stop. And then suddenly, that process that Harry just described of sharing, like, this is why I did this, and I take responsibility, the other person listening and forgiving, that's really the seesaw. So kind of ironically, like a negative event can actually lead people to the seesaw.
Yeah. We don't just want to be understood for our good parts, because that actually makes understanding a lot more precarious. But if somebody can understand what brought us to doing something that we're not proud of and forgive us and sort of love us anyway and help us to grow, obviously the responsibility is ultimately our own to make amends. But if that can happen, it can actually be very strengthening, right? That understanding and that willingness to take responsibility for the behavior that isn't all of you and that doesn't represent your best parts or your worst parts. It's just one small part of who you are, can be seen in a larger context. And I wanted to say this book is like jam-packed with the coolest research, the most powerful suggestions that are evidence-backed. And I highly recommend it to anybody who wants to feel more loved or be more loving in relationships. And I just wanted to say thank you both so much. Your research is so transformative. And this book, I think, will be such a game changer for so many people. So as a couples therapist and as a science geek, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time. And I so appreciate that you two were both willing to come and meet with me, because I wanted to chat with both of you so much. And I know your schedules are so busy. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really a pleasure. That was so much fun.
Yes, I appreciate it too. And it's great meeting you.
All right, that was my conversation with Sonja Lyubomirsky and Harry Reis, who I was really so excited to get on. And I had talked to Sonja Lyubomirsky before, as I mentioned in an earlier episode on positive psychology, But Harry's work I've been following for forever because he's one of these giants in marital research. And this concept of perceived partner responsiveness, it's such a powerful concept. And so I love that they came together to write this book, because it really is the case that academics get so siloed. And happiness in life really is predicated on having good relationships. And good relationships are predicated on feeling like the people that we're in relationship with get us and care about us. So I'm just really excited that this book is going to be out there. And I think it's such important research that people can access in this fun conversation, and they make it really a fun read. But what did you take away from it, Debbie?
Well, for one thing, I was taking tons of notes because I didn't really realize in advance of listening, but there's parts of it that I really want to work on, around how am I showing love and appreciation to the people I do love and appreciate. And so I found it personally helpful. And as an individual therapist, I actually found some parts of it helpful. And there were really two main things. So the first one that I'll tell you about was this idea that this really does start with making the other person feel more loved. And I was thinking about how often I will have clients who are either lonely or they're struggling to have the kind of relationship that they want. And they're just really frustrated because they're dating, or I don't know, there's some sort of relationship pattern there that just isn't quite getting to the kind of connection they want. And it can get very easy to be self-focused in those moments, right? Either to be sort of judgmental about the other person. Are they doing what I want? Are they a good match for me? Or they might be self-conscious, like constantly thinking, do I look good enough for this date? Are they going to think I'm funny? And even that is a form of self-focus, right? Like you're so self-conscious. And I always tell people, like, get to know the person. Like, you need to kind of focus on them, like, ask them questions. Like, you, of course, need to share something of yourself too, but you also need to, like, be genuinely interested in them. So I often try to help people shift out of that focus. And I think that's what they're talking about here, right? You're not going to get the relationship you want if you're just in your own head about it. You need to, like, expand your perspective to the other point of view.
Yeah. I have a random association that's coming to my mind as you're talking, which is to a conversation that I had a while back with Sion Beilock, who wrote a book called Choke, which is all about performing under pressure. And part of what she talks about, and the science on this is really clear when it comes to athletic performance or job performance, is that when we get too self-conscious, we tighten up and we don't perform as well. And I think that what you're pointing to is the same thing is true about relationships. If we're so worried about how we're looking, then A, we're not connecting with the other person because our focus is inwards. It's not outwards towards the other person. And also we tighten up, right? We're not as relaxed. We're not just kind of in the moment. We're not in flow. We're not in the zone. And so your advice is really good and kind of fits in with that cognitive science, which is the solution is don't worry about how other people are perceiving you. Get interested in the other person. Find something to focus on in the conversation that isn't about you, that is curiosity about their experience, or what do you like about them, or what do you think about what it is that they're sharing. So I think that that's really good practical advice and really does help with the self-consciousness and also with the connection building because you're not so internally focused. But a second thing that I think comes up in what you're saying is this idea of reciprocity, where if you like other people and if you find them interesting, they're much more likely to like you and find you interesting. And so part of what I do in the therapy room, honestly, is with whoever I'm meeting, if I don't automatically like them, I actively look for what I can like about them, right? Some people don't initially come across as likable, but you can find something to like, I think, about almost anybody. And to make that a practice. And the fun part of that is that even though you're not making it your focus, that people often like you more when you like them. It just feeds itself. And so it's a thing that you can actively pursue in a given conversation across a long-term relationship. That is a focus that is something you're doing kind of for the relationship and for the other person, but ultimately, sort of as a side note, serves you too.
Mutually beneficial for sure. And then the other part that I just wanted to circle back on, because this is one of the notes I took and I put like a little next star to it because I was like, yes, this is so true. Okay. It's this idea that when we present a highly curated view of ourselves and we get into this belief that I have to be a certain way to be loved, Like we have to wear the right clothes. We have to look a certain way. We have to be charming and clever and all of these things, and how that backfires, because then we have to keep that up or else the love will disappear. And what that evoked for me had to do with the culture that we're living in. You know, we live in this world of online influencers, and someone's always trying to sell us something to look a certain way or to wear this or that. And I mean, that's fine if you like to do those things. But I think that when we start to believe, and we are really sold this, we start to believe that to be accepted, we need to do all of these things, we sort of lose our authenticity. I remember my mom saying to me, like, well, just be yourself. And I've given that advice to people too, like, be yourself, be authentic, be real. And sometimes I think it's like, well, how do I do that? You know, what does that even mean? But honestly, just being aware of that tendency sometimes to put that pressure on ourselves to act a certain way, to dazzle people, you know, truly, if we want an authentic connection with someone that's going to last over the course of time, we really need to be real and human and be authentic and be ourselves. And so it was just a reminder, and I think just something that's a little bit hard to do this day and age. Even if people are on dating apps, they feel like they have to curate their profile and they have to lose 10 pounds before they can go on a date, and they have to be fit. And it's like, you just need to find someone who likes you for you. And you need to be kind of more in connection with the real you and show up that way.
Yeah. And then you feel afraid. It's like relational imposterism. You're constantly afraid that you're going to be found out, but you also feel disconnected because you're not sharing the real you. But the other thing that comes to mind in what you're saying, Debbie, is how we often feel about people that are imperfect. We often find them super lovable. And
totally.
I was just remembering, I often publish my Substack and only discover after that it has typos in it. And then I fixed it after. But after it's shipped, it's already like in people's inbox. So it was evident that the gaffe was there. And I made a comment in the newsletter, sorry about the typo. Ha ha ha. I was like trying to make myself seem humorous about it. And somebody commented that it just made me more likable. And it just was such a reminder of we don't need to try so hard. And I'm not suggesting that I should include lots of typos in all my newsletters, but there is something so charming about people that are just human and not saying exactly the right thing and not having the perfect witty response. For me, I find that really connecting and lovable.
I agree. We're all under so much pressure to be perfect all the time, but those are the things that we love about other people, is their little quirks and flaws and just humanness. And I think that's really true. And yet we still feel that pressure to be perfect. So we need to lay off that.
So we hope people get a lot out of this conversation with Sonja Lyubomirsky and Harry Reis. And as a little heads up, I got to interview Harry again for my book, which comes out in November. So you can get to know him a little bit better when my book comes out.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.